what should I do as an AD carry in solo queue? And if I win lane or lose it, it doesn't matter. Everything is just about the solo lanes. There's, a reasonable number of players who like feel that AD carry might be weak right now. I think that's like a reasonable opinion to have. The reality of AD carry is that it's a very team-reliant role to some degree. They are some of the strongest characters in the game in terms of output when they're allowed to do what they want to do. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the strongest character in the game, to be clear, but it's a thing where it's like if a Jinx is allowed to just sit there and do whatever she wants with a team that's defending her and things like that, she's going to, have a very, very powerful output with the amount of just raw, undodgeable damage she can do, right? And, AD carries tend to scale very well as well. And so one thing I would say that is true about League of Legends in general is any given character is going to have strengths and weaknesses, and like ideally, and that goes to classes as well, and ideally like those are things that are hard to transcend. One of the things that's rough about AD carries is that one of the things they have a hard time transcending is like if you don't have a team that plays around you and protects you, you're going to have a hard time staying alive, right? And that's just kind of like the natural reality of AD carry, which makes them balanced, because if they have a hard time staying alive on their own, that means they can be really, really strong with their teammates and, scale multiplicatively and things like that. Like the thing that makes AD carry's damage output fair tends to be their survivability, as an example. And so, yeah. I'm not sure that's the most satisfying answer, and it's to some degree a non-answer. But just kind of noting that, different classes have different strengths and weaknesses, but they're going to have a hard time getting around. A core weakness of the AD carry class is survivability. And I think one of the struggles with AD carries is that when AD carries are strong enough to not care about their team, that tends to look very, very unbalanced, because then like the rest of the characters in the game are like, well, what do I even do if this one character just, scales the best, has targeted undodgeable damage, and they don't even need other people on their team to protect them to succeed. And then we get to the other end of the spectrum where AD carries feel very, very team reliant, and then they're like, hey, it doesn't matter how I play, because if my teammates aren't, doing the right thing, I'm just going to die anyways, right? And it's a very challenging balance. AD carries just cry every season, you're doing great. I mean, AD carries tend to feel bad if they're not one of the strongest classes in the game. That's a real statement, that's true. When AD carries aren't very strong, they tend to feel like they're weak, even if they aren't weak. That doesn't mean that AD carries can't be weak. And it doesn't mean that even when AD carries are powerful, they might feel bad about the way they are powerful. A really easy way to describe this actually is Jinx from like a decade ago. And so let me tell you about Jinx from a decade ago. Jinx from a decade ago was a lower agency character. She had shorter range on rockets, her mines didn't arm as fast, her W didn't cast as fast. She was just generally had less agency on the game. But she still had rockets and she still had minigun. She still did a lot of damage, she still outputted very powerfully on the game. And that Jinx, interestingly enough, there were times when she would be 51 or 52% win rate, and we would seriously consider buffing her, even though she'd be 52% win rate. You might be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. She's so, 52% win rate, that's so strong, right? And it's like, well, the problem that Jinx would experience, the one from 10 years ago with lower agency, is she would often have games where it wouldn't be on her to win or lose the game. It would be entirely on her teammates. And then it just turned out that she was a strong damage tool that her team needed. And so Jinx would win a lot of games, but it would not really be her winning. Instead, she would be coin flipping her team doing well. And if her team did do well, she'd be able to carry them to victory because she provided lots of good DPS, right? And so it's kind of an observation of, we had a character then who was strong in terms of raw power, but didn't necessarily feel as strong when you played her, because you very often felt like your power was expressed mostly through whether your teammates were succeeding or not, mostly through whether your support was good at the game, whether your mid laner was good at the game, whether the enemy assassin was behind, things like that. And then if those things were true, you could pop off because you still had a useful kit. And that generally is like a global AD carry problem overall in a lot of situations where, like, you know, when AD carries are close to balanced, one of the things they tend to experience, which I think is a reasonable thing to be sad about, even if they might be close to balanced, is they'll be like, well, hey, yeah, my character is, my role is, you know, viable in the game, but like I'm not the one winning this game, right? It can feel pretty rough if you say go 5-0 in lane and that doesn't mean anything, right? It can feel pretty rough if you're the best mechanical player you could imagine, and if your support abandons you, it doesn't matter, right? Things like that are like classic issues with AD carries. And it's a complex problem too, because another thing that goes on in this thing is like the constant struggle be AD carries and bruisers. And the way I would describe it is like, so let's say an AD carry goes 5-0 and a bruiser goes 5-0. Who's supposed to win? Based on the meta, AD carries might come out on top there, bruisers might come out on top there, but usually if one of those characters is very likely to win when they go 5-0 versus the other one tends to feel like they don't function, right? Metas where the 5-0 AD carry is all that matters, suddenly bruisers are like, where's my success? What was I supposed to do? And metas where the 5-0 bruiser is all that matters, a lot of AD carries will be like, what about me? I got ahead and I didn't matter, right? And so it's generally like a complex space where it's like it's a trade-off between one class or another, things like that. I would say like maybe one thing I would think about AD carries that I think Freak was mentioning about too is AD carries tend to be very like attached to their support, and like it tends to be like pretty reliant on whether your support's on the same page with you as whether you're going to pop off. Supports at the very least, if they don't like their AD carry, they can go roam, right? Whereas AD carries, they don't have that option, so they're just like really hoping their support's good, or they're hoping that their support roams, the enemy support also roams, because if the support's not going to do that, they're going to be struggling, right? And so one thing I've generally wondered about myself is just like, are AD carries and supports like too tied together to some degree? Given how reliant at least one of them seems to be on the other. But on the flip side of things, League is a team game, and it's generally fun to play in a duo lane a lot of the time. Like, there's a lot of people who really like playing in duo lanes together, and part of the cool part of the duo lane is that you and your support work together to succeed, right? And so those team play moments that the duo lane creates can be like really, really exciting, right? So yeah, it's a complicated space.